When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease College YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing a character analysis of Daemon Targaryen. Now, I will say, because I'm recording this after I recorded the whole main video, I wanted to get this video out on Saturday, but it just wasn't really possible. I wanted to put an extra stuff into this video, especially because Daemon is one of my favorite characters. And a couple other things I want to say before we get into the video that are very important. One, obviously, House of the Dragon spoilers, Dance of the Dragon spoilers. So again, if you don't want future seasons of House of the Dragon spoiled, you really can't watch this video, because this video is going to talk about his entire life. And this video, very similar to a Maegor video, is going to be discussing Daemon as a character. Was he this fabled hero of House Targaryen? Or was he more of a villain? And was he more of the way House of the Dragon went with this character? So we're going to be basing all of this off of Fire and Blood. So if there's information that in Fire and Blood we don't really know, we're going to keep it like that. We're not going to go off the House of the Dragon version. I may reference House of the Dragon, as some of the rumors that House of the Dragon did go with is kind of where that came from. They are not actually fact in Fire and Blood. Fire and Blood comes from a bunch of different stories that may or may not be true, and we're kind of left to figure out what we think happened. So that's why I think certain characters just have a polarizing view. Like, some people think of Daemon as much more favorable as others. And there's even a quote at the end of the story that I'm going to kind of explain on that and how he was viewed, regardless of whether you thought he was a major hero or a major villain, or he was somewhere in the middle. So, before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow to feel that I like this content as well. Also, if you guys have another character you would like me to do, let me know. I would prefer if we stick to more morally gray or complex characters, because it makes it more of an interesting video. Is unlike someone like maybe Ned, where Ned is he's obviously one of the more morally good characters. Don't get me wrong, he's an interesting character to study, but I personally enjoy the characters like the Daemons, like the Maegors, like the Aemons, even characters like Rhaenyra and Alicent, where they're very complex. But let's get into the video. So I kind of have this in set parameters. So the first part of this is going to be the time period before Viserys becomes king. So in 81 AC, Prince Baelon Targaryen and his sister Alyssa give birth to Daemon. And early on, we see that Daemon was a very adventurous, and he was this kind of fun, like, kid. Kind of how we see in House of the Dragon with Viserys and Daemon, like, you know, how they interact and why they have a relationship, why Viserys wants that back. Daemon was a very, how would I put this? It was a kid that was, like, always doing something, right? And this is even exemplified by the fact that within a fortnight of his birth, his mother took him on a ride on Meleys. So again, it also establishes that Daemon was very close to his dragon, and establishes him as going to be one of the greatest dragon riders, if not the greatest. We then kind of skip a few years. There wasn't a whole lot that I wanted to note in between these, and we don't have a ton of information about Daemon in those years either. But we know he worked at his sword play. He worked on kind of building his reputation up. At the age of 16, he was knighted and given the Valyrian sword Dark Sister by King Jaehaerys. So these are huge honors when you think about this as a young man, as Daemon is. He's knighted extremely young and given one of the greatest swords in all of history. So this kind of shows you, even from a young age, Daemon was already being respected very heavily. And we even get this note here that Daemon was one of the most deadly swordsmen the Targaryens have ever produced. Think about that. That's a very high praise, right? Because we know there were people like Visenya, who was a great sword fighter. We know Maegor was a great sword fighter. We even know characters like Aegon was a very good swords fighter. Aemond, as we'll see in the story, the Dragon Knight. There are a lot of great swordsmen the Targaryens have produced, and Daemon is already, you know, up there as being one of the best, if not the best. And the same year, as him being knighted and also getting this Valyrian steel sword, he would marry the bronze bitch, aka Rhea Royce. And that's so getting into this marriage, and this is something I had to do some extra research on because I wasn't actually sure if Daemon for some reason chose Rhea or what happened here, because we know that Daemon, one, doesn't like the Vale, two, he doesn't like Rhea, so why did this relationship happen? And for all the praise we give Alysanne for her work with putting people together, and usually she does a very good job, she had a big miss here on multiple reasons here. So I want to talk about a couple things. So one, I don't think this marriage makes any sense. One, you look at the idea that Daemon's personality as a whole, I don't see why Alysanne would think Daemon and Rhea would be a good combo, especially with Rhea being in Runestone in the Vale, and it just obviously doesn't fit Daemon's personality. And also Daemon, would rather just be his own like solo swordsman, or at least marry someone in a land that's close to King's Landing. Two, why would you try and get more backing from the Vale when Daemon's brother Viserys already married an Aaron? So you already have the support of the Vale, even though technically I guess you could say it'd be strengthening it, but again, very weird thing going on there. So the next idea will be, okay, well, maybe Daemon wasn't that important because they thought, okay, Viserys is going to have a bunch of male heirs and Daemon really isn't set to be on the throne. Why wouldn't you go for a marriage that makes more sense? So again, I have a lot of issues with this marriage by Alysanne. As much credit we give her for this stuff, she whiffed on this by a lot. It just bothers me. There had to have been someone else that Daemon could have married that made way more sense. Whether that's a Lannister, a Hightower. I don't think there was really any Velaryons to marry, but you could have saved Laenar a little bit later until maybe there was a Velaryon. Again, I don't think there was. Also, you could have waited for, I don't know, maybe a Stark. Get the Starks involved in the crown. A Tully, this or that. There's so many options that needed to be considered for this, and the fact that he goes to a Royce, kind of an underwhelming marriage in my opinion, and we see that just it didn't fit Daemon, and it didn't work. So, yeah, there's that. Also, Rhea Royce becomes known as the Bronze Bitch by Daemon. Yeah, so again, relationship was a major whiff. Now, at the Great Council, we see here that there's two clear options for who's going to be the next in line, or become king or queen. And the obvious choices are either Viserys and Prince Balon's line off of Jaehaerys, or going through Rhaenys. Now, there was two options for the Rhaenys camp. It either could have been Rhaenys or Laenor. It didn't end up going this way. Now, the interesting thing to note here, though, is that Corlys had been kind of gathering ships. He'd been gathering a fleet, maybe to protest the decision, or kind of show his power. And Daemon, right behind that, starts gathering sworn swords, other men to his brother's cause in response to this. So again, we see how Daemon is a very supportive brother of Viserys, but more importantly, I think Daemon is supportive of his brother, but he also wanted to see that he was cemented as being second in line and his family or his bloodline on the throne. I think that was huge for him. Now, again, nothing would come of this conflict between the two, but Viserys would become king. And that's going to get us kind of into the reign of Viserys. And this is going to be pretty much where we pick up with on the House of the Dragon timeline. There's a little bit of build up before we get to the main events of House of the Dragon. But we see that Daemon was very influential in King's Landing in the early stages of Viserys' reign. He was in numerous positions. So he starts as Master of Coin. He's in that for about a year. And then about 6 months after, he was Master of Laws, until eventually he's out of that as well. Now, there were a couple of reasons these didn't really work for Daemon. One, Daemon is someone that doesn't really like to be sitting down and just ruling, I guess. It's very similar to Robert Baratheon, where Robert Baratheon wasn't very much of a fan of this. Daemon is very similar in that way as well. Now, the other reason is because Otto Hightower continuously just kept pushing to get Daemon off of the small council, put him in other positions. Funny enough, they gave Daemon, in my opinion, two of the more important small council privileges, like Master of Coin. We see what Littlefinger is able to do with that. Master of Laws is definitely a big one, and we even see how Daemon uses those two positions and his experience with those to form how he takes control of the Golden Cloaks, where at that time it was only known as the City Watch. They weren't actually known as the Golden Cloaks until Daemon gave them all Golden Cloaks. Like, Daemon himself, like, kind of armored them and actually made them a fighting force, which is something we have to give a ton of credit to Daemon for, as they really weren't, like, this prestigious group at King's Landing until Daemon kind of gets there. And when I say prestigious, I don't mean, like, they were the most organized group of all time. I mean, they all still were. There was a little questionable stuff going on when Daemon was leading them. As House of the Dragon kind of alluded to, I didn't really like the way they portrayed Daemon as leader of the Golden Cloaks, as we'll talk about here in a second. But I want to get back to Otto Hightower and Daemon's relationship, where in the book Fire and Blood, it's made very ambiguous as to why Otto Hightower doesn't like Daemon. We hear some rumors here and there, but we don't actually know exactly why. So we're kind of left to infer, like, why doesn't Otto like Daemon? Now, firstly, there's this rumor. Again, we don't know how popular this rumor was. We don't know if Otto ever heard about this rumor. Is that Daemon actually took Alicent Hightower's virginity, which I don't think happened, but maybe it's something that Otto heard of and he just didn't like Daemon because of. I could see that, definitely. Especially when you see, like, Otto Hightower's, like, plan of trying to get Alicent to be close to Jaehaerys and then also Viserys. If that was to happen with Daemon, not great. So maybe that's possible. The other idea here goes into basically a Maester conspiracy type thing, and also the Hightowers themselves, is that they were trying to gain power. And when you're trying to gain power, and you're manipulating this kind of weaker king like Viserys is in the book, again, in the book, he's much different than he is in the show. One of the better changes, you want to get someone like Daemon, who is very confident in themselves. He's a very dangerous warrior. He's a dragon rider. You want to get him as far away as power as possible. So, and that's kind of what Otto Hightower kind of goes about doing, right? Is he just continuously pushes Daemon out of the spotlight, out of a position. And we even see this for a while, is that Daemon kind of believed that he was the heir to Viserys, because Viserys had no children with Aemma Arryn, and so he believed he was the heir. And the thing that kind of comes about that is Otto Hightower then starts pushing for Rhaenyra to become the heir. Very interesting when you look at later on, when we have this same idea that, oh, should a male come or should a female come? And Otto Hightower chooses the female here, but the male later on. Interesting to note. But getting past that, Daemon during this time also wanted to get his marriage set aside. It was something that he wasn't spending any time with Rhea. They didn't have a relationship. It's very obvious that neither one liked the other. It was very mutual. It wasn't like this thing where it's like, oh, one person didn't like the other. No, it was like they both hated each other. And this was refused. I don't know why this was refused. I feel like it's quite obvious that this relationship didn't work. I think it was probably just another Faith not liking the really strong Targaryens, the powerful ones like Maegor, like Daemon. So they just kind of cucked Daemon more or less. Because, again, it doesn't really make any sense why this wouldn't have been annulled. But that's what happens at this time. And for now, Daemon is kind of stuck. So, again, Daemon becomes captain of the City Watch. And he does all of his things like creating the idea of the Golden Cloaks. And Otto kind of has a misplay here. He gives, in my opinion, Daemon his strongest position, because Daemon works best as a leader, as someone that inspires respect and loyalty. And he gives him 2,000 men that are completely, or at least for the most part, 2,000 men that are completely loyal to Daemon. Not something you want to do when you're trying to get this individual to lose power. And that's kind of what happened. So the next part of this is going to be Otto trying to figure out, okay, well, how can I get Daemon out of this position and out of favor with Viserys? Because very dangerous spot, because not only did Daemon or Otto not like Daemon, Daemon didn't like Otto. And it's very obvious because Otto is manipulating his brother Viserys, and Daemon sees that, right? Just like how we see in House of the Dragon. Daemon understands that part of the game, and Viserys just doesn't, leading to another reason as to why Daemon wouldn't like Otto. And this is another thing that I think you think about when you look at King's Landing, is that crime went down tremendously. Now, this is probably due to his harsh treatment of thieves and criminals. Now, I want to point this out specifically. In Fire and Blood, there's not really any indication that Daemon was attacking or doing any of these punishments on anyone that was innocent. These were people that were thieves or criminals. Now, maybe you can say, okay, what was Daemon's definition of criminal? For the most part, I think what Daemon was doing was justified. Maybe his actions were a little bit intense. Maybe he should have just been putting these people in jail and maybe having Viserys do the justice. But his methods worked, right? And I don't really have any problems with what he was doing. So to me, this is one of those moments where I think House of the Dragon got wrong, where it made it look Daemon look like he was just doing crimes and harsh punishments to anyone, when in reality these were targeted people that were criminals or thieves. So to me, not any problems with this. I think this is just another smear campaign on Daemon, and something like with Maegor the Cruel, where it was like, Maegor at times had very harsh punishments for people, but they were justified in what he was trying to do, like trying to get rid of this armed faith and stuff like that, that helped House Targaryen. So I think this is another one of those moments where you see the High Tower smear a little. And something I want to note here with Daemon is, with the good and like all these things I'm talking about with how well he was doing in this position, also comes the bad. At the same time, Daemon was making himself known to people that maybe you don't want to be known to. He became known as the Lord of Flea Bottom. Not exactly a great title for someone that is the heir to the throne. Well, not officially by Viserys, but I think in most people's eyes, he's the heir. Not a great reputation. Daemon's reputation at this point was good and bad. It's a very up and down thing, where it's like, great leader, handling crime really well. He has a lot of experience in things like Master of Law and also Master of Coin. Maybe that's another reason why Daemon felt like he was someone that was able to dish out punishment, because he was the Master of Laws. So again, there's the good and the bad. And what we finally see here is kind of the catch up to House of the Dragon. This will get us kind of into episode 1 of House of the Dragon. And at this moment, Viserys has no male heirs. He just has Rhaenyra. And for a long time, and I think this is very understandable, is that Viserys doesn't actually name an heir. You have to think Viserys at this point still believed he was going to have more children with Aemma. And so there was no real reason to name an heir until he got a male. And, well, we see what happens. Aemma gets pregnant, and she's giving birth, and her son, Balon, die. Now, this leaves a massive question as to what is going to happen. Is Daemon going to be named heir? Will Rhaenyra be named heir? And again, we hear reports. I think it's awfully convenient, the timing of this, and I don't... The show leaned completely into Daemon being a villain, in my opinion, or just showing all the bad sides of Daemon. And so we hear that there are reports that while drunk, Daemon utters the line, "heir for a day," referring to Viserys' son Balon dying only a day after being born. And this gets back to Viserys and prompts him to name Rhaenyra heir, and Daemon, being furious, takes Mysaria on Caraxes back to Dragonstone. So I want to talk about this situation for a second. One, I don't know if this was ever uttered, and even if it was something said in a really drunken state. that I don't know if this should have been taken seriously to the extent it was. I do think that if Viserys wanted to avoid conflict for the moment, he should have named Daemon the heir instead of Rhaenyra. And I'm a big Rhaenyra supporter, because the problem with naming Rhaenyra heir right now is that if you do get remarried, you're going to cause an issue because of what ends up happening. You have another male heir down the line. Well, it's like, well, what do you do now? Do you change the heir? If Daemon is the heir as of right now, and then you have children that are males down the road, okay. And you could always, down the road, if you don't remarry, you don't have any more kids, you could just rename Rhaenyra. You could say Daemon is not fit to be king and name Rhaenyra. Could have done that. I still think there was going to be a conflict either way here. So if Viserys had named Rhaenyra and then instead gone to Aegon, I think that's the only way there wouldn't have been conflict. Because if that would have happened where Rhaenyra or Daemon was named, but then all of a sudden gets renamed Rhaenyra is the heir, I think there is a chance that Daemon would have gone into open rebellion or war with the crown after Viserys' death. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure on that one. I could see both sides, because Daemon did respect his brother, but we see that this is not a great decision by Viserys, in my opinion. I think he could have handled this much better. And even with the Daemon thing, we don't know if that's true or not, because look at how that benefits Otto. It works towards exactly what Otto wanted. Daemon is now out of the city, and Rhaenyra becomes the heir. It's exactly what Otto wanted. So a part of me wants to believe that Daemon didn't actually say this, and that Otto just kind of made it up. But I don't know. I think it is likely that he could have said it as well, just knowing who Daemon is as a person. It's a really weird one. I think there is that fine line there that maybe Daemon alluded to it, and Otto reports that he said it to Viserys. That is also very possible. Now, while on Dragonstone, because Daemon goes back to Dragonstone after this whole situation, he gets Mysaria pregnant, and he wants to kind of do the traditional Targaryen custom, which is put an egg in the cradle, but Viserys denies this and tells him to go back to his wife. Now, this is, again, another issue that I get why Viserys is saying this, but why wasn't the marriage to Rhea annulled? It doesn't make any sense to me. You knew this was going to happen because Daemon didn't like his wife, and his wife didn't like him. And this relationship wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't furthering House Targaryen. That's the reason that Daemon doesn't have more kids, is because he doesn't like his wife. So why wasn't this just put off? You would have avoided a situation like this. But very differently than the way this happens in the show. I didn't mind the way the show did it. I thought it was actually a decent change. It gives a little bit more of kind of a stressing to the earlier parts of this story. But in Fire and Blood, more or less, Daemon just kind of agrees, and he sends her on a ship, or Mysaria on a ship, to Lys. And unfortunately, a storm hits, and his child dies. And Daemon, he's not pleased with this. He's pissed off at Viserys, and for now, he's gonna basically bide his time. He can't really do anything at this point to like go against his brother. His brother's the king or whatnot. But that'll kind of lead us into the next portion of Daemon's life, where Daemon, up to this point of his life, has been very involved in court life. He's been in a lot of powerful positions. He's kind of grew a name for himself in Westeros. But I think Daemon has kind of seen that he can't really go up any further. He's been pushed out of King's Landing. So now he's going to look to make his name bigger in other aspects of the world, and getting into more of military. Because up to this point, Daemon's been a great swords fighter. He's shown that he's a great leader with the Gold Cloaks, but he hasn't really been part of a war or a military campaign, and that's going to lead us into the War of the Stepstones. It's one of the biggest misses, in my opinion, for the entire show. I think it was, episode 3 or 4? It was one of the earlier front half episodes. But Daemon goes on this, 4 or 5 year journey, I think. I think it's about 5 years where he's in the Stepstones, and he's more or less conquering. He's leading his army, or he's leading an army with Corlys, and the two are taking down the Triarchy. It's a very eventful time because it not only sets up things to happen during the Dance of the Dragons, but it also develops characters like Daemon and like Corlys. Why, when the war starts, the black side have much better leadership. They have much better military strategy. They're almost more prepared for the war than the Greens are. And the blacks are the ones that figure out Viserys dies later. It's a weird idea, and it's something that I wish House of the Dragon had done better. But, like I said, in 106 AC, Daemon, he takes his talents to Corlys Velaryon, and the two are going, hey, let's figure out this stepstone issue, and let's kind of do it. Now, I want to parallel Daemon to Maegor here, because so there's a point during Aenys' reign where Maegor is the one that's basically making a name for himself. He's putting down rebellions, and he's becoming much more respected throughout all of Westeros, to the point where people think, okay, maybe this Maegor guy should be the king. That's what Daemon's all about right now. Daemon is showing that Viserys is not doing any action here. He's not taking part. He's not going after this main issue, showing his complacency, while Daemon is this person that is willing to rise up to the action. So it's a very similar idea here of Aenys and Viserys. It's almost, again, a repeat of history, where Daemon is playing on that issue where he is going to gain the respect of Westeros by dealing with these threats to the country, that Viserys is too, I guess, cautious and doesn't want any type of warfare and all these things, continuing Jaehaerys' peace. And that's kind of Daemon's side of it. Now, Corlys has an entirely different side of it, of just the stepstones being controlled by the Triarchy is hurting his trade. It's making him not as rich, and if Corlys was to control this, their family would become even richer than it already is. Now, Daemon would also supply men like the company, the Second Sons, and also just other adventurers, people that wanted glory and wanted to go with Daemon. Daemon was someone that was very easy to look at and be like, hey, I will fight for this guy. Daemon inspired just loyalty, and he attracted people to his cause. During this campaign, Daemon would be successful for the most part. He didn't take all of the stepstones. He took all but 2 of the islands, and in the process, he also did kill the crab feeder. With that being said, he made a lot of enemies, and this is something that's going to sneak back up later on during the dance, but he makes enemies with Lys, Myr, Tyrosh, and even Dorne a bit later on. In 109 AC, so about 3 years of conflict, he was named King of the Narrow Sea and the Stepstones. Now, he would stay in the Stepstones for about 2 years, until I think Daemon himself got bored of this. I think he kind of got complacent. He wanted more, and he returned to court, offering his crown to Viserys, and the two reconciling. Now, there's a lot that kind of happens when Daemon comes back, because there's this tournament where we kind of see the forming of the Blacks and the Greens, and at the same time, we see Daemon with his badass entrance coming in with Caraxes, and there's this whole situation where it's like, okay, oh shit. Is Daemon about to just roast everybody here? Is he about to just take the kingdom for himself? And instead, he gives his crown to his brother, and the two kind of come back together, and this kind of starts the second period of Daemon and King's Landing. Not going to last very long, but it is going to have a major ripple effect on the rest of the story. So after this time of Daemon coming back to the throne, we're not exactly sure on the events that happen here. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of things we just don't know. So let's start with kind of some of the things we do know. Daemon was not a fan of Alicent or her children. And I think this is for obvious reasons. They pushed Daemon further down the line for the throne. And also, Daemon was never a fan of Otto Hightower, so why would he be a fan of Alicent or any of her kids? Also, there could have been a past relationship with Daemon and Alicent. Probably not, but it is hinted at, and there was a rumor of it, so maybe that also could be why. What we also do know here is that Daemon reestablished his relations within the city, so whether that be with people in the City Watch or other people within the city. He also gets close to Rhaenyra. Now, the show went with, okay, well, they pretty much were feeling each other, and they wanted more of a sexual relationship. In this situation, we don't know to what extent the two got close. We know that Daemon was offering Rhaenyra gifts, and the two would go on dragon rides a lot, and we understand that they did get closer. Now, maybe over this time period, you could assume that Rhaenyra started to fall for Daemon, because when we look at Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship, I think Rhaenyra truly did love Daemon, but I don't think Daemon loved Rhaenyra. I think Daemon was someone that maybe found Rhaenyra attractive, but it was kind of this means to an end, where I don't think Daemon really liked marriage at all, or having to be this dad or father figure and having all these responsibilities. I think Daemon used relationships more to his advantage, and I think that is true with Rhaenyra. But so at this time, we don't know if Daemon took Rhaenyra's virginity. We don't know what happened there. There's a lot more speculative rumors. And the even bigger thing here is that, like, in the show, they went this whole route where Daemon brings Rhaenyra into a brothel, and the two are seen, like, kissing and, like, about to have sex, but they don't. So, again, don't know what was going on there. There's also these rumors that Daemon was helping teach Rhaenyra how to do sexual stuff so that she could then do that on Kristen Cole, who she actually liked. I don't think that has really a lot of validity to it, because I think Rhaenyra, just based upon what we see in the future, Rhaenyra ends up going with Daemon, that she already had some sexual connection to Daemon. Now, again, all up to speculation. I would assume that they didn't do anything here. I think maybe the two got close and Rhaenyra started to fall for Daemon, and Daemon kind of maybe pushed back on this for now. That is how my interpretation of it is. You can go a lot of different ways with it. Whatever way you want to go, let me know in the comments and why. And whatever happened, we know that 6 months later, Daemon would be exiled for an unspecified quarrel. So again, a lot of rumors here that we don't know what may have caused this. I would lean towards the High Towers, for one, did not want Daemon in the city. And I think when you play into that and you look at why things would happen one way or another. One, I don't think it makes sense for Daemon to try and sleep with Rhaenyra or any of those things, because at this point, we have to remember Daemon was still married to Rhea Royce. She doesn't actually die for a couple years. And when you think about it like that, at this moment, I think it's just Daemon plotting the seeds of maybe later endeavors that he could maybe get in a relationship with Rhaenyra. So I don't think that was the case. I think it was one of those things where when we look at Fire and Blood in the history, I think it's the Hightowers seeing how close the two got created some rumors that maybe had some validation. Maybe Rhaenyra was trying to come on to Daemon. We don't know. Right, and the two being alone together quite a lot, you can kind of put together a rumor that, like, we do see spread, that the two are together. And maybe Viserys and Daemon argue about this. Maybe Daemon's like, why don't you trust me, this or that. And Daemon is exiled from the city, more or less. And I think that makes a bit more sense. Personally, you can kind of take this the way whatever way you want to. You can take it the House of the Dragon route. There's a lot of ways you can do it, and that's why I love Fire and Blood and the histories we get there, because you can kind of create what you think happened based upon the information. Now, whatever the case, he would return to his kingdom in the Stepstones until about 115 AC, when Rhea Royce would suddenly die from falling off a horse, leading to some speculation that Daemon was involved. Now, I do think it is quite weird that Rhea Royce would die from falling off a horse, but I would stake the claim that this could happen, especially in a medieval time. And also Daemon, I believe at this point, I think the timeline is he's still in the Stepstones, so you would have had somebody else do it. I don't know. I think this maybe will have been a coincidence. I am someone that tends to believe Daemon gets a lot more heat / shit than he actually probably did. But again, maybe he was involved in this, maybe he wasn't. We just don't know. And it's just kind of left up for us to guess. So, instantly after her death, Daemon tries to go to Runestone to stake his claim, because again, Rhea Royce was set to inherit Runestone. So Daemon, being her husband, assumed that he would then claim the rest of the castle. And this was refuted. No one was like, yeah, no, Daemon, you guys were barely even in a relationship. You're not getting the castle. Sorry. And that never really comes to be. And this is when we see the next formulation of how Daemon kind of climbs that ladder a bit, where Daemon then meets Laena Velaryon, Corlys' daughter. And he basically asks Corlys, can I marry your daughter? The problem is Laena was still married, or not married, but she was betrothed to someone else, a Bravosi. And Daemon kills the Bravosi in a duel and claims Laena with Corlys' approval. So we see for a number of reasons why this would be beneficial to Daemon. One, you're siding with one of the most powerful families right now. He also can kind of see that there's a conflict brewing between kind of the Rhaenyra camp, the Hightower camp, and also the Velaryon and Hightower camp. So it makes sense to ally yourself with the camp that doesn't like you. That makes sense. Also at this point, again, very key here. This is another big point. Laena at this point had possession of Vhagar. This is the dragon that eventually Aemond would get. And having the most powerful dragon, with Daemon being one of the best dragon riders, one of the best swordsmen, one of the best generals at this time, with another fearsome dragon, Caraxes, that's a fearsome combo if they were ever going to need to go into a war. And how different the world would have been if Laena had stayed alive with Vhagar up until the Dance of the Dragons. The blacks probably steamroll the greens. So again, this makes perfect sense, and it was actually a very good move for Daemon at this point of time. I also don't want to say that Daemon just went for Laena because of that, but I think Laena also was described as being very beautiful as well. So I think it's a number of things. Lust is an attractive wife and is a politically advantageous move for Daemon as well. And the two, because again, they don't get the blessing of Viserys. This is a very common theme later on in Viserys' reign, where people just don't give a shit about his opinion or blessing. And they would go explore Essos for a while, kind of just stay low. And in 116 AC, Baela and Rhaena would be born to the two. Now, Daemon, this is kind of just a normal request, asks for a royal blessing from Viserys, which was accepted by Viserys. Now, interesting enough, his small council tells him that he should refuse Daemon, which is interesting, because if you think about this, what the small council is telling Viserys to do is to basically smack Corlys Velaryon in the face again. His grandchildren would be refused a royal blessing. Viserys, for all of his faults, makes the wise decision here. And Viserys also notes that maybe fatherhood has changed Daemon, which it really hasn't. But it's a good political move that Viserys does not listen to his small council, something we only see him do a very few amount of times when you really think about it. But this was a good move, and Daemon comes back and he gets the royal blessing. Now, unfortunately, Laena would die 4 years after her daughters were born, and she was trying again. Very common theme we see with House of the Dragon. She dies trying to give Daemon an heir or a male, and she would die. And at the same time, we know that Rhaenyra had been married to Laenor. Laenor is Laena's brother, and he was killed by Corey, his secret lover. Now, this happens relatively quickly after Laena dies, and it's a tough, because there is some reasoning as to why Daemon would be maybe involved in this. I'm not sure. I think this is one of the more believable ones. A lot of the rumors about Daemon, I'm just not sold on them, but this is one that I do think is very possible, just based upon the fact that Rhaenyra and Daemon get married right after this. So, it's not even, it's literally within 6 months of Laenor and Laena being dead. I think there is a possibility that did happen. Maybe it was just Carl just was jealous that Laenor was spending time with Rhaenyra, even though they probably weren't having sex or anything like that. I do think it is interesting, though, that may have been I do think it's interesting that Daemon could have been involved within that one. Let me know what you guys think on that as well. And at the same time, we see Lionel and Harwin Strong die in a fire at Harrenhal. Now, I think obviously this is probably Clubfoot. I think he has the one with the most motivation. Some people point to, well, Daemon would want another of Rhaenyra's lovers out of the way. But at the same time, it's like, I mean, I think everyone kind of knew Rhaenyra was not going to marry Harwin. It didn't make any sense, so I don't think Daemon would have had that much of an issue of Rhaenyra having like a side hoe, basically. So that moves us kind of towards the ending and the build up to the Dance of the Dragons. Now, the two would secretly marry, and by two I mean Rhaenyra and Daemon. They would secretly marry later that year, and this was not a good look. They didn't tell Viserys. This was very much frowned upon, and it's the worst nightmare if you're someone like Otto Hightower or the Hightowers as a whole, where Rhaenyra at this point, this is kind of where she had to turn to. She can't marry anyone else really in the Velaryon family. So what's the best marriage for Rhaenyra? It's Daemon. Daemon's the best general. Daemon has Carax. He's a very fearsome dragon. He is someone that can aspire loyalty. It makes a lot of sense for why both of these characters decide to get together. I think Rhaenyra already liked Daemon anyway. But again, it makes perfect sense as to why the two meet up. And for the Hightowers, you now have the most dangerous man that you've been trying to push out of the capital for years now, married to the person that is your most bitter rival at the moment, and the person that is trying to sit on the throne in Rhaenyra. And just kind of going into their relationship, Daemon and Rhaenyra would have two sons, Aegon and Viserys, in 120 and 122 AC. And the last thing I wanted to note, talking about kind of the build-up of the Dance of the Dragons, is that one particular scene that I always talk about in House of the Dragon that was done very poorly is Vaemond Velaryon's plotline. In the book, it's more like Rhaenyra hears this shit, is fed up with it, tells Daemon to go get him. Daemon captures Vaemond Velaryon, and then on Rhaenyra's orders, he beheads him, and then his corpse is fed to Cyrax. So, again, we see how the two are growing more cruel as the years go by, and that's going to lead us into the dance. Now, I want to specifically say, just so this video isn't 3 hours long, I'm going to specifically focus on the parts of the dance that Daemon was involved in, or things that maybe impacted him. I'm not going to focus on every single detail of the dance, or things that just don't really matter to Daemon that much. So, getting into the book events of what happens here, Daemon really is the person that is taking charge when Viserys dies and when they find this all out, because Rhaenyra, she's in labor, she has a miscarriage with their child. I think they were going to name her Visenya, if I'm correct on that. And Daemon's the one kind of figuring stuff out. He's like, okay, well, this house, we need to court them a little bit, right? We gotta make sure they're in with us. Daemon is this person that understands warfare perfectly, right? He had been doing warfare for I think around 5 to 6 years in the Stepstones. He knew what to do, right? And he is someone that was perfect for this position. And I think Daemon himself knew that this was going to happen. So he'd already preconceptualized what they had to do when this war broke out and when Viserys inevitably died. Daemon, also to note, is the one to place old King Jaehaerys' crown on Rhaenyra. So that's just something else that's notable to put on there. And with the war starting, Daemon kind of understands that they need a foothold for their armies to rally at. So if you look at, for instance, the Greens, their main forces were on land. They could rally at King's Landing. They could rally in the west at Casterly Rock. They had all these other places already established. Whereas the Blacks, not as certain, right? Like you had the allegiance of River Run. You had the allegiance of, later on, the Vale, the North. But you didn't really have like that really good foothold in inland. And what ends up happening here is Daemon basically goes, okay, I'm going to basically go hands-on. I'm going to take control of our war efforts where the war is going to be at its thickest, in the Riverlands, right? It's the main hub. You have some of our main enemies in the Lannisters right there in the west. You're going to have, bam, right to the south, you have King's Landing, and you've got all the forces there. So Daemon decides, let's take out Harrenhal. And he goes to Harrenhal, doesn't lose a single man. Simon Strong kind of gives it up without even conflict. Daemon just lands on Kingspire Tower, and kind of that's the end of it. Very wise decision. And that kind of starts where Daemon will focus a lot of his war efforts on. It's going to be in this Riverlands area. There's time where he's not at it, where Aemon's at it, and it's kind of this back and forth between the two. And at this point, we know that Luke dies to Aemon, and Daemon tells Rhaenyra that this will be avenged, and through Mysaria, hires blood and cheese and proceeds to murder Prince Jaehaerys, son of Aegon II. Now again, this shows Daemon in this light that he is willing to do some very dark actions. Killing an innocent child is not a good look for Daemon's morals, and to me is a very dark period of this time, and it shows you the way this war impacted everyone, not just the people that were involved in starting this whole conflict, but innocent children that probably should never have been involved in this. And again, I said earlier in this video that Daemon's time in the Stepstones would come back to haunt him. And this is completely correct. Otto Hightower had kind of been getting in contact with some of Daemon's old enemies, and the Triarchy sent a fleet that broke the Velaryon blockade of King's Landing, and would also result in the death of Jace. So again, we see how Daemon's actions in the past come back to kind of haunt him. Now, it didn't specifically impact him because Jace wasn't his son, and the Velaryon fleet, as yes, it was a bit of a defeat and a kind of a setback in the long haul of things, didn't impact too much. But it also hurts his wife's mental state. At this point, she has now lost 2 of her 3 children by either Harwin Strong or Laenor, whichever way you want to go about that. And of learning of the incoming Green Army led by Criston Cole, Aemond, and Vhagar, Daemon retreats from Harrenhal and helps take the mostly defenseless King's Landing. So the whole idea here is kind of, while some things are going on, Aemond kind of gets impatient, and he's more like, we got to take the fight to Daemon. And he is correct in his assumption that if Daemon was to fall, the Blacks would fall as well. And so basically, he's sitting here going, okay, let me just go kill him, and that'll be the end of this war. In theory, decent plan, but when you're going against a military strategist like Daemon, who's a genius for this, it just doesn't work out right. You leave King's Landing basically defenseless. They have no dragons to defend it, really. Rhaenyra and Daemon just easily take it. And what I think is very interesting here is that Corlys suggests when they take King's Landing that they should try and make peace. And again, we see the ruthlessness of Rhaenyra and Daemon, how the two, I think, were toxic for each other, and how this war and the betrayals they have seen in the past, they cannot do that. There's no functioning part of their brain that says, let's make peace with these people. And I don't think there would have been peace anyway. I think Aemon still being at large just destroyed any chance of that, because Aemon was never going to surrender. So if they had somehow killed Aemon at this point of the war, and maybe Criston Cole's army, I think it's actually very likely they could have gotten peace terms here and actually had like settled the conflict much earlier and had a lot of death not happen. But at this point, I think it's nice what Corlys is suggesting, but it just wasn't possible. So after Rhaenyra was successful in taking King's Landing, Daemon, along with one of the Dragonseed's Nettles, are ordered to find and kill Aemond in the Trident. And this kind of starts the last leg of Daemon's journey, and it's really just going to be about, okay, we need to stop Aemond and Vhagar. They're kind of he's just basically going around the Riverlands, and he's just burning keeps or villages that are not in support of his family or the Greens. And for a while, Daemon is not successful with this. He's really never successful with finding Vhagar, which is very weird because Vhagar is this huge dragon. It's ancient at this point, and he can't find it with Nettles. It's very weird, and it shows how Aemond has probably matured and become a really good military strategist himself. And when you think about it, the two switch places. Before, when Aemond originally was coming to the Riverlands, he was the one trying to hunt down Daemon. And now Daemon returns, and he's the one hunting Aemond. And for a while, this doesn't work until a very important event happens. When the two dragon seeds switch sides and go to the green sides, it basically sends Rhaenyra into this idea of mistrust. She basically starts mistrusting all of the dragon seeds, and this leads her to do something that was very rash. So Mysaria basically tells Rhaenyra that Nettles and Daemon are sleeping together. And Rhaenyra basically sends a letter to Manfred Mouton to basically kill Nettles and tell Daemon to return to King's Landing. Rhaenyra is very stupid in this. I'm a huge Rhaenyra supporter. I love her character. I think she's a very morally complex character, and I love that about her. This is probably one of her worst decisions she ever made. It just doesn't, like, even if, right, they kill like House Mouton, they kill Nettles, Daemon is going to turn on you. Let's say that, like, they were sleeping together, which again, we don't really have any confirmation of that. We have either rumors that they were in a relationship or that it was more father-daughter. We don't really know. It's kind of left up to speculation. As Nettles was extremely young, I think she was only 16. I think Daemon was, I think he was in his 40s at this point. Maybe I might be wrong on that, but he was still much older than she was. Maybe he was father-daughter. Maybe it was more. It's because it's very weird because Daemon doesn't seem like he was the best father to his twin daughters. So it is interesting that he would be like a father figure to Nettles when he doesn't do that for his own children. So I would probably go with, just based on Daemon's past, that he actually probably was sleeping with Nettles. But either way, it doesn't really make sense for Rhaenyra to trigger her best lieutenant and her husband as well. Daemon should have cheated on Rhaenyra, but I mean, you know. But this is basically what fractures Daemon and Rhaenyra, because now what ends up happening here is that Manfred Mouton's not an idiot. He's not an idiot. He realizes that if he goes through with what Rhaenyra says, Daemon could very likely burn down the entire city, castle, whatever. So he basically tells Daemon what's going on. Daemon basically sets Nettles up to leave and tells her to go and basically stay hidden. So that's kind of what happens there. And Daemon makes it very public. He does this for a reason. That he is heading to Harrenhal with Caraxes. Alone. That's the big key word. Daemon is more or less challenging Aemond to a one-on-one combat. And again, when we see that everything in Daemon's life has gone wrong, or he hasn't gotten what he's wanted, violence has been the answer for Daemon. And that's exactly what he gets. He stays at Harrenhal for a few days, and eventually Aemond One Eye comes to the challenge. And we see the two launch into probably the most bloody and probably amazing, not amazing for anyone there, but just visually picturing in your head this fight between Vhagar, the oldest dragon at this point, the most vicious one, against Caraxes, a war veteran, bloodthirsty dragon that is being commanded by the best dragon rider probably in their entire family. And Daemon, with his, in my opinion, superior military prowess, leaps from his saddle and drives Darksister into Aemon's blind eye. Now, we're told that this killed both of them, which makes a lot of sense. Both dragons tumbled to their deaths, along with Aemond and probably Daemon. But what's weird here is that after the conflict, Aemon's body was recovered, but Daemon's supposedly was never found. Very interesting. So the way I kind of think about this is that I probably think that whoever recovered the bodies was probably not a black supporter or someone that didn't like Daemon and probably just burned his body and then said, oh yeah, we couldn't find his body. That's how I look at it, because there's no way Daemon survived this. There's no way. There's not really any foreshadowing that he lived through this conflict, and it wouldn't really make any sense for him too. And I think this is a very fitting ending for Daemon, so I would be really upset if he came back up in the story, because I just don't think it makes any sense. Now, Daemon's legacy, for the most part, would go through his sons with Rhaenyra. Yes, he did have his kingdom in the Stepstones. Eventually, that would fall. I mean, it held for a while, but eventually that would fall. And the biggest thing here is that both of his sons would, in turn, sit the Iron Throne. Aegon III wasn't a great ruler, and partially is blamed for why the dragons died out. But his second son, Viserys, was a very wise person. He was Hand of the King for over 40 years and also became king for a very short time. I think, by all accounts, was a very good ruler. And that's kind of where Daemon's legacy goes. It's through... He is more or less the male that keeps that line going. Because we know the Hightower line of Targaryens basically dies out. So Rhaenyra's side with Daemon is what lives on. And we've kind of come to the end of Daemon's life, and you might still be asking yourself, who is Daemon? Was Daemon this hero? Was he a villain? He was involved with the slaughter of an innocent child. There's multiple accounts that maybe he was involved in killing other people that were maybe innocent. But on the other side of that, he was a great military commander. He was this person that inspired loyalty and respect. He did help with cleaning up crime in the city. And he did do a lot right in his life. And I think the answer really is he's somewhere in the middle. And we just don't know to what extent he did certain things that muddy throughout history. We don't know who he was. We don't know fully what he was as a person. And that's what makes studying him and characters like Rhaenyra, like Alicent, like Aemond interesting, because we're not inside their brain. We don't know what exactly they did or did not do. And it's what's interesting is that you can come to your own conclusion. There might be people in this comment section that think he's the best, and there's other people that might think he's not so great. So, to end out this video and to, I think, summarize perfectly what Daemon was as a person, we're going to take a quote from Fire and Blood from Manfred Mooten's captain of the guard and Manfred Mooten's brother. This is the quote. This is a quote basically right from when they're thinking about how we're going to kill Nettles, or that whole goal about that whole idea with Daemon and Nettles. And this is the quote. This thing is easily done. The prince sleeps beside her, but he has grown old. 3 men should be enough to subdue him, should he try to interfere. But I will take 6 to be certain. Does my lord wish this done tonight? Manfred Mooten's brother replies, 6 men or 60. He is still Daemon Targaryen. So thank you guys all for watching the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know this is a really long one, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I know Daemon Targaryen very much is a fan favorite on House of the Dragon, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.